Hello there. Do we have anyone on? Looks like we got some comments going already. Daniel Common from Seattle. Thanks for joining us. Bonjour. That sounds like you're from someplace else. BRTC in the house. Brad Townsend, cheers. James B. Roger, good evening to you too, sir. Hanquan Park. Rob Dell, Indianapolis. Andy Spivey. I'm doing well, sir. I'm not good at looking at the moderators, or being the moderator and the person that's live. Andre, hello to you, sir. From Brazil, nice. Stoked for the goat. That should be a t-shirt. Bourbon Brains, hello to you. I know we need TPG in South Carolina. However, there are certain states that we can't go into just quite yet, because some of the states are franchise states, and once you form a relationship, you're stuck with it forever, and we're not in a position to negotiate the kind of deal that we're going to be able to negotiate in a little bit. So we are waiting. And some of the states are control states where the liquor stores are owned by the state. And we are also not ready for that level of regulatory compliance. So we're going to get there, but not right away. Richard from Richmond, Texas. Thanks for joining. Adam, cheers. Cheers right back at you. James, West Palm Beach. Cheers to you, sir. Jerry, also from Florida. Ted Toe, Denver. Has it made its way to Chicago? We are trying real hard. We've had some meetings. It should be in Chicago by the end of the year, but there are no guarantees. We've done this kind of dealing before, and then it did not work out the way that we wanted. So you have to keep working the system until you can find a distributor that you want to partner with that is willing to put in the work and take you on, because you can't always write your own check, right? You have to play the game, and you have to entice them to want to work with you. So hopefully we will be in Chicago by the end of the year, but we will see. Rimmels from West Virginia, cheers to you. Chad from New Mexico. Chad, we just signed a contract in New Mexico. The Prideful Goat will be to you very soon. I would guess within the next 30 to 45 days, you are going to have Prideful Goat in New Mexico. Wisconsin, we're actually talking with somebody about going to Wisconsin. So that'd be cool. We're already in Conroe. You should be able to get it anywhere there. Tennessee's tough. It's a franchise state. We had a deal worked out. There were some shenanigans and it fell apart. But we do want to be in Tennessee real bad. But we're going to get there eventually. Rob from West Virginia, welcome. Give it a few more minutes for everyone to jump on. Can everyone hear me okay, actually? I assume that you can, based on the comments. Let's see, New Orleans. We are already in New Orleans, so you should be able to find us there. Let's see. Yes, sir, you can hear. Someone asked about New York. Stephen Mueller. Stephen, we are trying to get to New York. We have a new wholesaler that we've been talking with. We told them that we want to be in New York and Maryland. And he said, oh, we need to talk with this person and that person. And we said, cool. We would love to talk to them. Give us a contact record for us to get in contact with. Tell them we're going to call. And that has not happened yet. So we are working on it. But next on our list are Illinois, New York, and Maryland, possibly Wisconsin. Which, by the way, Wisconsin apparently has been crushing it in the bourbon game, which I didn't know. But we heard that that Wisconsin's like doing some stuff, so that's pretty cool. Hear me great. That's good to hear. Sound is good. Cheers from Hy-Vee, Texas. Fellow Texanite. Is that what we're called? We're just Texans. Let's see. Leesburg, Virginia. Welcome. Rob. Cheers from Pittsburgh. Marissa. Hope to see some 15-year around here. Marissa, actually, we did send some 15-year to Florida. We do not know where the wholesaler sends it, though. So it's not impossible for you to find it in Florida. I know some people who have. If you go to the link, and I'll post it in this video description later of where the stores are that should have our product, you should be able to call around to them and find out whether or not they have any 15-year in stock. I know it's in a lot of stores in California right now, but the pricing's a little higher than we wanted it to be. We're going to talk about that, how it's kind of outside of our control. So there's that. But yeah, so let's see. I think we're recording too. So it is 7:31. So I'll warn you guys that I will kind of do my presentation, and while I'm doing the presentation, I won't be able to read your comments because I'm a guy and I can only do one thing at a time. Lindsay would probably be able to do both, but for me, I can either speak or I can read comments. So I'm gonna do kind of the presentation part, and then we will transition back to me reading your comments, and we're gonna do a Q&A section a little bit later. So that'll be good. Looks like Tola Wine and Inlet Harbor in West Palm Beach, Florida has the 15-year. James, how much is it there? Do you know? I'd be curious to hear that. We actually sell it at a price that they should be able to price it at around $140. But a lot of the wholesalers and retailers are marking up the 15-year since it's not available on the market anymore. So that is completely outside of our control. Michael Lopez. Cheers right back at you in Michigan. Phoenix. Nice. Dustin, glad to have you on. Arizona is another market that we are working on. All right, so it looks like James says that it's 160 if he remembers correctly. Shelby tries to keep the prices fair. Could have been a situation where the wholesaler marked it up. There's also some extra taxes going in to Florida. We've got Colorado Springs. What it do? Joe Boyles from Louisville. Louisville. I got complimented for saying it right when I was in Kentucky. I didn't say Louisville. I said Louisville. I don't even know where that came from. So in New Orleans, it's $1.99. So that's not the best. But I would actually buy a whole case if I found it at $1.99. So I'm weird like that, though. All right. Well, it is 4 minutes after, so we're going to get started. So basically what I wanted to do is have you guys on there, and hopefully you all have your samples that we sent out. And if you don't, hopefully you're able to source a bottle so that you can taste along with the rest of the group. But we are here to do a tasting of the Prideful Goat 6-year cash strength non-chill filtered rye whiskey. It is 95% rye and 5% malted barley. And if you're familiar with the industry, that is going to be an MGP mash bill. So Multigrain Products International out of Lawrenceburg, or no, is that right? Lawrenceburg, Indiana. They make a lot of whiskeys. They've started some of their own brands, like Rossville Union is their rye brand now. And then their bourbon brand is Remus. But for the longest time, they sold finished whiskeys, not like finished in that they've been aged in another barrel, but that were, done aging and ready for bottling to other brands. And there have been some pretty famous brands that have been created from MGPI. Smooth Ambler Old Scout got a lot of juice from them. Kentucky Owl got a lot of juice from them. Whistle Pig, Sagamore. There's been, countless large brands. Barrel, Craft Spirits. It's gotten a lot of stuff from MVP. And their inventory has basically evaporated. So it's very difficult for an NDP, which is a non-distiller producer. And that's what the Prideful Goat is. Not saying that we'll remain a non-distiller producer forever, but there's a chance that will be the case. Let's see if my hair is not in there now. Okay. Trying to get it so there's not a bunch of wasted space. I got my Prideful Goat glass here. I wanted you guys to see it. But so we are a non-distiller producer, which means that we source whiskey from other whiskey producing companies. And that gives us the opportunity to try samples and make sure that we're getting something that we feel comfortable putting our name on. And the origin story, it's kind of interesting. December 19th, 2019, I went down to a distillery in Houston called Gulf Coast Distillers. And it is the largest distillery west of the Mississippi. They have capacity to produce, I believe it is 7,000 barrels a month. That is a pretty large distillery. For reference point, if you look at a big distillery like Buffalo Trace, they do about 1,200 barrels a day. So they're considerably larger, but like MGP, which has been supplying whiskey for all those brands I just mentioned and a bunch of others, only does about 9,000 a month. So it's a pretty large distillery. They have 3 different sets of or actually 4. So they have like a smaller pot still that's for test. They have 3 pot stills that they can do batch runs in. They have a giant pot still that they can do batch runs in. And then they have the column stills. So the background story is it's December 19th, 2019. I go to the distillery for a Texas Whiskey Association event. I was going there to try and find new people to interview for the podcast, Bourbon Real Talk. And I am standing in this beautiful tasting room of this huge facility. And I'd heard some rumors about this place. And the rumors were that there was some guy that bought the Uncle Ben's processing plant that was built for the World War II effort. And that this processing plant was processing and sending rice to the Allied troops. And when this individual, his name is Carlos de Aldecoa, was in college, he found out that this plant was for sale. Now, Carlos's background is he's a third generation international coffee baron. So his entire family have coffee businesses all around the world, and they're not small. So Carlos's coffee businesses in the United States, I asked him one time, what percentage of the coffee that's in the United States does your company touch before it makes it to the hands of a consumer here in the US? And he said 40%. So think about all of the coffee in the US, 40% of that he touches. 100% of the caffeine that goes into Coca-Cola products comes from his decaffeination plants. By the way, Coca-Cola, from what he told me, is the only major soft drink producer that uses natural caffeine. Everybody else uses chemically produced caffeine. So he also controls 97% of the organic sugar in the United States. So gigantic companies. And when he's in college, he finds out that this rice processing plant is up for sale. And he, like Richard Gere in Pretty Woman, goes in, evaluates the investment opportunity, and realizes that they're selling the land and the plant for less money than the equipment is worth. So he goes to his dad and he's like, hey, give me a loan from the family's businesses. I'm going to buy this processing plant. And his dad gave him, I can't remember if it was 12 months or 18 months to pay back the family, or it was going to become a family asset. And over that time frame, he took the equipment apart and sold it piecemeal to rice manufacturing companies all around the world and raised enough money to pay off the debt to the family. And he owned this industrial plant outright in college, debt-free. And he started some coffee companies there. But in the future, he got interested in starting a distillery. And I asked him one time, I said, why would you start a distillery? Like, it is the worst business model ever. Like, the failure rate's super high. It's so hard to produce a product that people want and then to get distribution and everything else. And he said, I don't know. I guess I just like manufacturing things that people drink. And I was like, okay, fair enough. You make coffee, organic sugar, and now whiskey. Awesome. So I'm standing there, I meet this guy, and I could tell people are being a little bit different around him. And I'd kind of heard the backstory. So I was like, hey, is this your place? And he was like, yeah, it's, my family's businesses own it, trying to, be humble. And he said, do you want to go on a tour? And I said, yeah, I've never been here before. And so he tells the bar manager, I think it was Andrew, and he was like, hey, give Randy a pour of that 15-year Kentucky straight bourbon that we got. So he gives me a pour of this 15-year Kentucky straight bourbon, and he takes me on a private tour, said a bunch of like really insightful, hilarious things, and I just kind of fell in love with the guy. And we're sitting there at the table. Some of his high school friends are there, and we're drinking this Kentucky straight bourbon. And I said, hey, can you give me a single barrel of this? Because I run this big whiskey club and, we do a lot of single barrels. And he was like, do y'all have a license? And I was like, oh, crap. This dude that owns this giant distillery is not familiar with the single barrel process, right? I was like, no. We never take possession of the whiskey. You bottle it up, you send it to your wholesaler, whoever it is. And then we tell a retail store that we work with to put in a PO. And then it gets shipped to the retail store, and we tell our members what day to show up, and they buy it all. And he's like, cool. Yeah, we can do that. And I said, how many barrels can I get? Because I have friends that run other clubs. They probably want this stuff. It's really awesome. And he's like, as many as you want. And so I set up Oklahoma Bourbon Connoisseurs, another club in Dallas, my club, Someone Say Whiskey, and Houston Bourbon Society. We were all going to get barrels. And the distillery manager calls me and he's like, hey, there's a problem because the whiskey is not in barrels. It's in shipping containers, and they're totes. And each tote is about 1,300 bottles. And as good as the whiskey was, I didn't think that we could sell 1,300 bottles in Someone Say Whiskey. So I called my good friend Christopher Hart, who runs Houston Bourbon Society. He also has an amazing podcast called Whiskey Neat. And I was like, hey, man, that barrel that I was talking with you about, we're not going to be able to do it, but we could do a whole tote. What would you think about doing a statewide release? And he was like, screw that. Let's make a new brand. And I was like, can you even do that? Like, Christopher's a much more experienced person than I am in the spirits game. And he's like, yeah, as long as the distillery is okay with it. I mean, we'd be operating. I said, oh, okay, cool. So I reached out and I said, hey, what would you think about starting a new brand? And Carlos was like, yeah, I don't care. I guess that's the benefit that you have when you own all those businesses and you have all those irons in the fire. He's like, if these guys are willing to run with this ball, let's let them do it. So he puts us in contact with his legal team. We got to pick the name. We still debate to this day on where the name came from. Originally, I said, do you have any ideas? Because I'm not very creative, and Christopher is. He creates beautiful labels. In fact, let me show you this. Christopher has another brand. It's called the Gregarious Grump. And this is his brand. He mostly bottles cognacs and rums. And he designed that label, and it's beautiful. I said, do you have any ideas for the name? And he said, well, what if we made it look like an old world Irish pub sign? And I was like, that's pretty cool. And so Lindsay and I started doing research, and we came up with some Gaelic names because we knew there wouldn't be any Gaelic names to compete with when we were trying to register the trademark. And we came up with this name that actually was my name and Christopher's name in Gaelic. And I called him and I pitched him on it. And he was like, you know that when people realize that we named this whiskey our two last names, that they're going to want to crucify us, right? Like, whiskey enthusiasts will not think that's funny. And I was like, you know what? You make a good point. And then he, out of the blue, says, what about the Prideful Goat? And I was like, well, I'll tell you about the Prideful Goat. It sounds like you've been playing on a hipster word generator, which I don't know if you know, but there's such a thing called a hipster word generator, and it just spits out words. And the Prideful Goat is the kind of word combination that come up with. And he was like, no, I just thought of it. And I was like, sure you did, buddy. So he still claims he just thought of it. I still kind of think it was hipster word generator, but who cares? We registered the trademark. We moved forward. Christopher had the goat, which if you look at the goat, he looks kind of prideful, if you ask me. Christopher had the goat designed by a designer, and then he took the goat to the label designer and said, let's make a label around this. And so we did it, and we did our first release of the Prideful Goat, 15-year Kentucky straight bourbon. This is batch one. Batch one is 115 proof. Batch one didn't have the batch number on it, but the others do. And we did batch one, and it sold out in about 3 hours in the whole state. And then Carlos was like, hey, let's do another release. So we did a release of batch two, and it sold out in about 3 hours, or no, 2 hours. It sold out faster than the first one. And then Carlos was like, hey, let's make this a brand. So we had to find some good juice, something that, was worthy of being in the Prideful Goat. And we searched long and hard, and we found this 6-year 6-year MGP straight rye whiskey. And we were able to buy it at a price where we could release it at a reasonable price. And that's kind of our goal with the brand. First off, we're whiskey enthusiasts ourselves. We love cask strength, non-chill filtered whiskey. And a lot of brands that buy this stuff don't do that because it's not cost effective. So what we wanted to do was to create a brand that was designed for you, the whiskey enthusiast. And we wanted to release it at a price that it was a relative value compared to other companies that were buying similar juice. By the way, don't get upset about the word juice. It's the term that industry people use. I get that juice is normally associated with fruit or whatever, and that this is whiskey. I get it. But sometimes people get real upset about me saying juice, and it's just the term that people use when they're referring to produced whiskey. Okay, so we found this, we tasted it, we loved it, we bought it, we bought enough of it to be able to maintain this brand line. So this should be something that once we hit distribution in your area, it should be there for an extended period of time. It's not like this one where we release it and it sells out in 2 hours and then you're never going to see it again. This is meant to be a permanent brand line extension. Eventually we'll run out of what we have, but hopefully before then we'll be able to find more because there are a lot of these bottles out there. So that's kind of the origin story. What do you guys say we taste some of this whiskey? Hopefully you all have your samples. There are more people on the live than received the samples. So hopefully everybody who got a sample actually got on the live because you took a sample from someone else. So I'm going to pour some for myself. If you have not already poured yours, I would recommend that you do that now. Aaron says he is so ready. Okay, so I have a single barrel pick of the goat and the sample for this tasting, and they seem very different. That is true. So that is Josh Bourbon, Bodybuilding, and Barbecue. They are very different. So let's taste, and while we taste, I'll talk about why the single barrels are so very different. So first off, if you're not used to tasting whiskey, I want you to start off slow. I was drinking before this started. We had a Bourbon Real Talk community member that flew in from Hawaii today. I invited him over to the house, and so he came over for some pours. So my palate's a little bit warmed up already. But if your palate's not warmed up, I want you to take it slow. I want you to take a very small amount into your mouth, tiny amount, just a couple drops. I want you to allow it to coat your entire palate, and you'll feel your body start to salivate and react, and it will proof that whiskey down with the salivation, and then you'll be able to swallow. And I want you to take a couple of more small sips like that and get it larger and larger until your palate's acclimated. And I also would like you to nose the glass. So get your nose in there nice and good. It can sometimes help to reduce the ethanol burn if you part your lips while you're breathing in from your nose. Help you get more of the fruit components and sweeter notes, the caramels, the baking spices, things like that. We've got Whiskey Chief. Says orange and butterscotch. And I would say that I do not disagree with you. So when I smell this, I get orange, definitely some butterscotch, but I get something else. And I'm not mad. Don't be mad if you don't get it. And don't be mad at me for my palate finding it. Okay. But I get bubblegum, like Big League Chew bubblegum from when I was a kid with that sweet forward. And that's kind of the base component for me for this whiskey is the bubblegum, the Big League Chew mixed with orange. And the orange is like a candied orange. Do you remember those when you were a kid? It was like a gummy bear type material, but it was shaped like a half orange slice. And it had the sugar coating on the outside, and you would just bite all the way through it. That's what I get on this orange. So if you haven't already done so, let's go ahead and taste it. And it's very good. So I get more of that bubblegum flavor. I get a little bit of mint on this, a little bit of cinnamon, a little bit of clove, and all of that is mixed in with the butterscotch, the orange candy, and the bubblegum flavor that I get. So hopefully, let's see, Whiskey Chief says orange and clove on the palate. That's fair. I can't argue with that. And it's pretty good. I mean, I drink a lot of different whiskeys, and I've shared this whiskey with a lot of places, a lot of liquor stores. I've gone in doing what we call market visits, and I have not shared it with very many people that did not think it was great. So that's a good sign. So let's talk a little bit about why this tastes so much different from the single barrel that you have. And there's a very good reason for that. So after we got all of the barrels in that we used to make these batches, I went down to Houston and sat down with Christopher Hart, who's my podcast and his podcast logos are on the back label. So you can see Bourbon Real Talk there, and you can see Whiskey Neat there. So I went down with Christopher Hart and the head distiller for Gulf Coast Distillers. And we had all of these barrel samples sitting in front of us. And one of the things you have to do is you have to taste all your barrel samples and decide which barrels are going to go into your small batch and which barrels are going to go into your single barrel program. And you literally sit down and all day long, you taste whiskey, you write down your notes, you vote as a panel, and then you move on to the next barrel. No, you do not swallow the whiskey because you're drinking all cask strength whiskeys. This distillery doesn't proof down their barrel samples before you taste them. Some distilleries do. And you're drinking all cask strength whiskeys. And I got to tell you, it is hard to do. I mean, a lot of people think like, if I could go into a sensory lab and taste barrels of whiskey all day, it'd be fun. But the reality is after you get past the first 8, 10 of them, your palate starts to get fatigued. It's hard for you to concentrate on the variance of flavors. But when you first get in there and you start tasting barrels, you start to notice some common flavor characteristics that are present in most of the barrels. And those are your average barrel, right? And that becomes kind of your litmus test. So when you taste a new one, you compare it to the average barrel and you say, is this different or is it better? And when we make these batches, most of the batches are around 40 barrels. And believe it or not, 40 barrels is enough to average out the small flavor variances of an average barrel. And so there's not a lot of variance between batches for the 6-year rye small batch. It's not like the 15-year where these 15-year batches maybe only had, 10, 12 barrels in them. That's not a lot of barrels to average things out, right? But with 40 barrels, it gets more averaged out. There's more consistency of flavor. So we are trying to find the barrels that stick out for one of two reasons. Either one, they taste like the average barrel, but they're way better. The flavors are more intense. Something that makes it taste like a premium version of the average barrel, right? And then the other thing that would cause us to pick a barrel for the single barrel program is if it had a unique flavor characteristic. So if it had a bunch of mint or it had a bunch of orange or something else that made it taste different, we would separate that out and say, you know what, we don't want to throw this into a batch because it's going to get averaged out in this small batch that we're making. Let's keep this separate so that people can taste this uniqueness. So that is the reason why the single barrels that you're going to find are going to taste quite different. Now, you might find some that taste just like this, but turned up to 10. And we kind of pick those for the liquor stores because liquor stores want something that tastes better than your average product, but not something that's weird because they're afraid to turn off their average consumer. But we picked the weird barrels for the liquor stores that have big whiskey enthusiast followings or whiskey clubs, right? If a whiskey club wants a barrel, usually they don't want something that tastes like the shelf product. They want something that's different. And so we pulled out barrels that were either unique or plussed up versions of the average barrel. So that is, he says, the Bourbon Junkie single barrel had a crazy bubblegum on it. I have not, I probably helped to put that barrel into the barrel program, but I don't know which actual barrel they picked. But I was super excited to see it go so fast. So that's good. And also kudos because Fred Minnick entered the Prideful Goat 15-year in his blind at Bourbon and Beyond, and we came out in first place against some heavy hitters, including the Knob Creek 15, which that made me very proud because I'm a huge fan of Knob Creek 15. So anyway, so that's kind of the base story. Do y'all want to hear a crazy story about like what would have been the largest whiskey fraud in human history? Let's see if anyone's interested in that. Because if not, we can just go to your questions. All right, here we go. So after we released the first 2 releases of the 15 year, we knew that we were going to run out of whiskey and we needed to find some more whiskey. And I was looking for whiskey for Unallocated, which is a house brand that we have for Someone Say Whiskey. It's not in distribution or anything like that. And the distillery found a broker who said that they had 10 to 12 year Kentucky straight bourbon from a major Kentucky distillery, which I'm not going to mention their name. We had to sign a non-compete to even find out who it was. And they offered us some barrels. And we said, yeah, we'll buy, X amount. And they said, oh, well, if you're going to buy that amount, you should buy a tanker. And you may not know this, but you can buy barrels of whiskey from other producers if you bottle other people's whiskey. Or you can buy shipping containers, or you can buy tankers. So shipping containers are usually 280 or 330 gallons, and then tankers are 6,000 gallons. So this broker's like, hey, we can sell you a tanker of 6,000 gallons for the price that you're willing to spend. And we were like, oh, okay. And then the guy's like, how many tankers do you want? And I'm like, how many do you have? And he said 50. So this guy has 300,000 gallons of 10 to 12 year Kentucky straight bourbon being sold at a price that was so inexpensive that we could have afforded to bottle it at $30 or something and still made a normal margin. So it was super, super inexpensive. But we can't take down that much. So I asked for a sample. I hop on a plane. I fly down to Houston. I meet with Carlos. I meet with Christopher. We taste the sample. And Carlos says, just buy it all. Buy all 300,000 gallons. And it was more than $10 million. I mean, it was expensive. And I thought like, oh my God, like we just secured the entire future of the Prideful Goat. We're going to have enough liquid to have products on the shelf, all different types of finish variations. We're going to be able to rebarrel some of the stuff and age it for longer. It's going to be amazing, right? Super excited. And we go to set up shipping, and the barrel broker says, well, I'll have the product shipped to me, and then I'll ship it to you. And we're like, no, because you don't have a license. You have to transfer and bond. You're not allowed to take possession of whiskey. You have to be a licensed distillery to do that. We have to have it shipped directly to us. So he gives us the contact information to set up shipping with the producer. And we go and start talking with them. And in the conversation, we're using the word bourbon as we referred to this liquid. And somebody on the other end says, why do you keep calling it bourbon? And we're like, why are you saying it's not bourbon? And they're like, because it's not. This is corn whiskey. This is not bourbon. And we're like, oh my God. I mean, we're about to spend millions and millions of dollars on something that we thought was a 10 to 12 year Kentucky bourbon. And it turned out it's not even bourbon at all. What's going on? So we reach out to the broker. We get on a recorded video call with the broker. We're like, how do you know this is bourbon? They're like, oh, they told us it was. We're like, in writing? Like, no, it was on a phone call. We're like, so you're trying to sell us millions of dollars worth of whiskey, and you have nothing in writing that says what it is. And at that point, the owner of the brokerage started to get upset because it was an underling that set this thing up. And he was like, let me get off. Let me do some research. I'll call you back. Turns out it wasn't bourbon. And we had millions of dollars in escrow, attorneys involved, everything. And we had to pull the plug on the deal. And if that deal had gone through and we had bought all of it, the retail value of that fraud would have been around $120 million. So when you think about like the Pappy heist was nothing in comparison to the value of this almost committed fraud. And I call it a fraud. It could have been an accident, but the whiskey was pretty light in color. And when we asked about it, they had all these stories about the warehouse location and slightly cooler temperatures and slightly higher humidity because of where it was at and all this stuff. And if they were able to explain away the lightness, it turns out the reason why it was light was because it was a mash bill that could have been a bourbon mash bill, but the whiskey was aged in used barrels. And if you take a whiskey that is 80+% corn and you age it in used barrels, it's corn whiskey. It's not bourbon. If it had been put in new barrels, it would have been bourbon, but it was used barrels. And so that is the story of how I went from the happiest person in the world, potentially worth millions of dollars, to completely devastated overnight because of what would have been the largest fraud ever perpetrated in bourbon history. So I wish that I could hear you guys because this is so weird. Somebody asked whether or not that is called light whiskey, and it was not light whiskey because light whiskey has to be distilled above 180 proof. So if you take a whiskey that's 80% corn, for instance, and you distill it below 160 and you put it in new barrels, it's bourbon. If you distill it below 160 and you put it in used barrels, it's corn whiskey. If you distill it above 180 and you put it in used barrels, it's light whiskey. So I hope that makes sense to you. Let's see. Amazing story. Wow. Let's see. What other questions do you have? How long until it's available in New Mexico? I'm guessing within the next 30 to 40 days. The contract was signed this week, and we just have to wait for the wholesaler to take possession, and then they have to get it out to retailers. But it's a pretty good wholesaler. We have some experience with them in other states, and we think that they will be able to get it out to a lot of retailers very quickly. And so you should be able to get the product in New Mexico before too long. Other states that we're working on, is it available in Arizona? No, not yet. We are currently working on a deal for Arizona, Wisconsin, and Illinois. And I don't know how long that deal will take. And then once we sign that deal, if we sign that deal, it should be 30 to 45 days before it's on shelves. Idaho is not currently on the radar. Tennessee is a franchise state, and we're kind of avoiding it. Time frame on New York and Maryland. We should be able to release some product in Maryland in the next definitely 60 days, maybe 45 days. We're unsure which wholesaler we're going to be able to do that through right at this point. But we've got somebody sending us a referral for New York and for Maryland for, a more longer term relationship. So that could work out at any time. But Maryland itself is pretty high up on our radar. We've already got a wholesaler that will help us get distribution there. But we're trying to see whether or not this longer term deal could plan out. So we'll see what happens with that. What's been the biggest challenge, both mentally and emotionally, in getting your whiskey brand kicked off? Biggest challenge, I would say that when we're partnered with a much larger distillery. I don't know how many brands Gulf Coast Distillers owns. I think at one point I heard the number 28. So, there's a good number of brands there. And there's a lot of people that work in a lot of different departments that work on behalf of all of those different brands. And so you are just one of the many cogs in the giant machine. And it can be a little bit frustrating because, I think that the Prideful Goat is the shining star and, should always be given preferential treatment and all that stuff. But you do have to balance out, the staff only have so much time to work the bottling line. And, one of the things you don't think about when you're making a whiskey, people don't realize this, but for every dollar that you add to the production cost of a whiskey, it changes the price about $2.99 for the inline consumer after everybody takes their markup in the 3-tier, food chain. And so anything that raises price is a big deal, including your labels. And you can print a custom label that has the proof and the batch number and the number of barrel or bottles that came out of the batch, all that stuff. But it's a smaller production run and it raises your cost per label. So if you do a really small production run, you can have a label cost that's up around $5-6 per label. And if you do a mass production run, you can have a label cost that's less than $1 per label. So imagine if you spend $6 on your label, that $6 is going to end up adding roughly $18 to your inline price. So there's always this struggle to determine how much detail are you going to put on your label and how much you're going to have handwritten so that you can use the same label for future batches, right? So if you do a large production run where all of the information that doesn't change per batch is the same, but then you got to handwrite everything on there for each batch. Now you have to have more staff involved in the bottling line to be able to get that batch bottled. And so dealing with stuff like that has been a bit of a mental challenge. Emotionally, there are a lot of ups and downs, because the biggest thing is distribution. So for a brand like this, we're able to scale quickly because of who we're partnered with. And to make it work, you have to have the right distribution partner in each state. They have to have the right sales staff that work for them, the reps that go out, and those reps have to have the right relationships with the right retail stores. And there has to be that trust relationship so that when they walk in and they go, hey, I have this new whiskey and I think it's going to be a big deal. And I think you should pick it up in your store. That the store owner just says, yes, that's what you want. But it can be difficult to entice a wholesaler who has those kinds of relationships, because if they're good, they don't need you, right? And so you have to be able to present to them that you're a big enough deal that it's going to make a difference in their future. And it's hard to do when you're a new brand. And that's why I've always said you could make the best whiskey in the world and still go out of business. Whether or not your brand survives isn't determined by how good your whiskey is. It's determined by other factors, sometimes marketing budget, right? So we didn't ask for any marketing budget for the Prideful Goat. Christopher and I didn't, because we're trusting that you guys, the people who pay attention to our podcasts and whatnot, will be enough of a marketing push to get us into new markets and to get the right representation so that the brand grows. So there are incentive programs that larger distilleries put together that small distilleries can't afford, where they'll offer like a bonus on cases or whatever. So if you sell more cases as a salesperson, you get your regular commission, but you also get kind of this bonus on the side. And it can be pretty significant for the salespeople. So as a brand, we haven't typically done that. So it's hard to get the people in the middle tier excited about your brand and out there pushing it the way that you want, so that more people get the opportunity to experience it. And so that's kind of been the emotional ups and downs of like talking with somebody that you think is going to be a big supporter. And all the initial meetings are always like a first date, like everything's great. They love everything you say. And then you just get this rejection letter and you're like, what the hell? Like, how'd this happen? I thought you were totally into this and that we were going to do great things together. And now all of a sudden you're like, not interested. There's been some heartbreak there, probably the largest heartbreak though was finding out that liquid was not actually Kentucky straight bourbon. Let's see. John Clark asked, how does distribution in states with state-controlled ABC boards work, as we have in North Carolina? So I get a lot of people asking about us going into North Carolina and other control states, and we're just not ready for that. We know that there's a lot of regulatory compliance, and the Gulf Coast Distillery, for the most part, sells their other brands in the state of Texas. They have a tasting room, so they already have tons of regulatory obligations to report how much whiskey and vodka and gin and all that's being sold. And so they're a little bit overwhelmed. So we have purposely avoided the control states because we don't feel like we're ready to deal with it. And that's why if you live in a state where the ABC is controlled by the state government, it's going to be probably a while before we have distribution there. And so let's see, Adam asked, are there plans to have a future 15-year, or will it make its way for a future product release? No. Unfortunately, no. This was a one-off opportunity. What we were told is that a major Kentucky distillery, somebody's already mentioned their name in the comments once today, distilled some whiskey for somebody else. And for whatever reason, that whoever the person was that contracted it didn't want it when it came of age. At some point, the distillery tanked it and put it in these shipping containers and then offered it for sale to the open market. And there were a lot of different brands that bought those totes. And I've tried some of the other brands' releases of the product, and I don't know why, but I like this one the best. But all of them were good. And I don't, so there's not a chance that that's going to happen again. The distillery that made this product doesn't taste like any of their regular products. So it makes me wonder whether or not they used a different yeast on this or something. And so, not that we won't have another 15-year, but if we bought more 15-year, or even if we made a 15-year and waited until it was 15 years old, it wouldn't taste like this. So it'd be something entirely different. Let's see. Next question. It's sold out, asked the distributor. Yeah, and that's kind of an interesting point. So I'll just go ahead and tell you guys. In California, Texas, Louisiana, and Florida, we're with the Mexcor. In Colorado, we're with Momentum. In Oklahoma, we're with Premium. So if you're going to the store and you know that we have distribution in the state, and they're out, ask them to reorder because they can typically get the product within days. Let's see. Somebody asked which batch we were tasting today. And I can't remember. I'm 99% sure that you guys have batch 1, because I had the distillery send me some ambassador bottles, and that's how I was able to get your samples out to you. And I think that what they had was batch 1. So you're getting batch 1 of the 6-year rye. I think there's 4 batches out right now. Let's see, online distributor. Yes. So if you guys want to buy this whiskey, you can get it in California, Colorado, Texas, Oklahoma, Kentucky, Louisiana, and Florida, and soon New Mexico. And with any luck, Arizona, Wisconsin, and Illinois will be next. And then Maryland, and maybe, which is still kind of a big if, New York. Those are the areas that we're talking with right now. But we do have an online retailer, and it is bourbonoutfitters.com. So if you go to bourbonoutfitters.com and search the word prideful, it comes right up, and you can click on it, order it, and have it shipped to your door. Now, that online retailer does not ship everywhere. And there is an online retailer that we've used in the past that does, but the way that they manage their business, even though we sold out in a relatively quick amount of time, they haven't reordered, so they're out of stock right now, unfortunately. So I'm not going to mention their names because I don't know if they'll reorder. But right now, bourbonoutfitters.com is where it's at. Let's see. Ralph says he got his rye the next day. That's pretty quick. Any idea what the next product for TPG is? As a matter of fact, I do. I have very good news for all of you. I'm so glad you brought that up because I totally forgot to bring that up. I should have mentioned it already. So TPG has secured a bourbon. It is 6-year-old MGP 21% rye bourbon. So pretty standard product. A lot of people have released a 21% rye MGP bourbon. But very excited about it. It will be released cash strength, non-chill filtered, and our pricing to our wholesaler will be the exact same price as the 6-year rye. And so it should hit your shelves at exactly the same price that you have seen the rye if it is available. And so that should be out, I'm guessing, in November. We're getting it out as quickly as possible. We just approved the label this week. I wonder if I can pull it up and show you guys the label. Where did I put my phone? It basically looks just like the 15-year goat label, except the 15-year goat label has a gradient that it's light in the center and it gets darker on the outside. And we remove the gradient. It's all one color all the way across. So, and of course, all the information is updated to be about the 6-year bourbon. Let's see. You working with Momentum for Wisconsin and Illinois distribution? No, we are actually talking with somebody else. I'm not going to mention their name because we're still, in the process. But we contemplated seeing how things went with Momentum in Colorado, and then see if we wanted to go in the other states that they're in. But this other opportunity came up, and this other distributor is in some other states that we need to be in the future. And so you don't really think about this, but from our perspective, we want our product, we want to charge what we charge for the product at the producer level. And we want it to get to you on the shelves at the lowest possible price, right? Because that's going to make the barrier of entry for you to buy it and try it lower. And so if we can find a wholesaler that operates at a lower price, that's great. If the retail store charges a lower margin, that's great. That is how we get the product to you cheapest. When you have a different wholesaler in every state and you do a deal with a nationwide retailer like Total Wine, for instance, they have to order their case volume from each individual wholesaler in each state. So they might be buying a large quantity for the whole country, but they're buying it from 8 different businesses. If you had one wholesaler that serviced all of those states, that large quantity would go in as one order and they'd get a case discount for doing a large volume. And that case discount would translate into a lower price on the shelves. And so when you're looking for a wholesaler, you want one that's large enough that they can do case discounts for large retailers in multiple states to lower the cost to your consumers. But you don't want to sign a contract with a wholesaler that's so large and in so many states that you don't matter to them, and then they won't ever push your product. You get what they call back shelved. And so they're your wholesaler, and in some states you can't fire them in non-franchise or in franchise states. But their salespeople never tell anybody about your product. And in some instances, in some states, they can charge you for storage. So if they put in an order for your product and then they decide not to sell it and it's sitting in their warehouse, they can start sending you bills for storage. And a lot of really small craft producers get put out of business that way. That wouldn't happen to us, but we don't want to get back shelved. So I hope that answers your question. It says, did you swap the label color on purpose? It confused the heck out of the Louisiana stores. Green bourbon and cream rye. Keep in mind that when we decided on green for the bourbon label, we didn't know that we were following up with a rye. So I don't know that there's a good answer for that question. I didn't think when we designed the green bourbon label that it looked like a rye, and now that we were releasing a rye and we needed to change the label color so that you understood it as a different product. Also, there's no particular reason that rye labels are green. It's just like, I think Wild Turkey or somebody did it and then everybody started doing it. So yeah. Oh, so it says, please elaborate on pros and cons of franchise distribution in states like Tennessee. All right, let's see. So franchise states, so you have open states, franchise states, and control states. Open states are the American way, right? You are in a business, you can hire who you want. If they don't do a good job, you can fire them according to the terms of your contract. In a franchise state, there are state laws. Now, these laws got created to protect the wholesalers in the state from gigantic beer producers, right? So what would happen is a gigantic international beer producer would go in and sign a contract with the wholesaler, and they would hire all the staff, and they would take loans out on trucks, and they would sign leases for office space and computers and everything you think of to be able to service this amazing contract that they just got. And then the beer producer would call them up and go, hey, so you know how you're charging us like a 25% margin? You're not gonna do that anymore. It's gonna be 15 from now on. And the wholesaler would be like, well, I can't do that, right? My entire business structure is based on it being 25. So I can't do it at 15. And the beer producer would go, well, you know who can? Your competitor down the street that lost the bid to you. They'll take it for 15 right now. So I strongly suggest that you figure out a way to do it for 15 or you're fired. And states got tired of their constituents being put out of a job because of these large corporations that had enough influence to force somebody out of business, force somebody else to be able to grow, all that stuff. So they said, let's put some laws in place that once you sign a contract with somebody, you're married, right? You're married and you got to go to court to get divorced. And that's how franchise states came about. The problem for us is that we're struggling just to get a decent wholesaler to give us the time of day. So if we go into a franchise state and we sign a contract, I like to make the joke that we're like the high school football star that everyone knows is going to the NFL. There's no question that we're going to the big show, right? The Prideful Goat will be a gigantic national brand, period, point blank, full stop. There will be no argument about it. But today we're not. We're just the high school kid, right? So if we start to go out and sign permanent deals and permanent contracts, we're going to end up with a worse deal than we would if we waited until we were in the big show, right? And that's why we kind of avoid the franchise states. And we talked a little bit about the control states. There's just too much regulatory compliance. We're just not ready for that. So let's see. What other questions do we have? It says Rossville's 95.5 as well, but they also have an interesting 51.49 rise. Yes. Yeah. So they have both. They have the Maryland style rye, which is the 95.5, and the Kentucky style rye, which is 51. If we found a great 51% rye, I don't think we'd pass it up. But what we've been able to find so far has been the 95.5, and people like it. We've kind of been sticking with it. Let's see. What other questions do we have? Where do I see TPG in 5 years? Just bigger. I mean, we have sales growth goals. So, and we kind of have a strategy of how to do that. Right now, we're working on sourcing some finishing barrels. So, when you grow a brand, you can grow by deeper market penetration, which can be consumer driven. You can penetrate deeper into what they call on-premise, which are bars and restaurants. Our product is moderately placed for on-premise. So a high-end like cocktail bar or like a steak restaurant or someplace that's got a little bit higher, price range, they could carry this product. But most of the lower end, bars that are mostly selling, Jack Daniels and Jim Beam white label, they don't have the customer base to be able to afford the pour price for something like this. And so we will grow more in the on-premise and the higher end premium spots. You can get deeper penetration into a market so that more consumers are buying your product. And we hope to be able to do that through outreach like this. But you can also grow by going into new markets, which that's kind of one of our focuses now, as we've mentioned, is to get new states of distribution. So we hope to do that. You can also grow by releasing more SKUs, because each one of these is a SKU, right? And so right now, the only thing that's on the shelves that we have to sell is the 6-year rye. We have a 6-year bourbon coming out, and we are going to do some finishing projects so that we have a third offering, which will be a finished version of the rye. So we plan to grow. I hope that in 5 years that we would be, I'd have to go look at our projections, but I would think that we would be in most states at that point. And we would be doing, a pretty high volume. So this year we'll probably end up finishing the year around 10,000 cases. We have 6 bottle cases, so it's around 60,000 bottles. So that's nothing. Jack Daniel's spills more whiskey than that per day than we'll sell in the whole year. But when you compare this brand to other, new brands, that's pretty phenomenal. Like I'm pretty impressed. I can't believe it's happening. I feel like I'm living a dream. And so yeah, that's I think we should be roughly. I'm hoping we'll be 10 times the size that we are now in 5 years. That's kind of the plan. Let's see. Great answer. Thank you for bringing awareness to mental health. Yes. So yeah, if you're new to this, because a lot of people that are on here, they just signed up for the free tasting. You should watch the Bourbon Real Talk community or Bourbon Real Talk channel. Probably join Bourbon Real Talk community on Facebook if you're on there. I think you would be on there because that's where we did the advertising. Because we have a big, push towards mental health and making sure that people are connected. It says, do you think you'll retire from real estate and do whiskey full time? No. And yes, at the same time. So my daughter is, she turns 18 on Monday. I love real estate, and I spend a lot of time building my real estate business, but I am a person who works until I fall asleep every night because I have so many irons in the fire. And that's not sustainable forever, and everything is growing. And so I think eventually I'll have to pass the baton, if you will, to somebody who will run point with the business. My daughter has currently expressed an interest in that, but I also don't want to pigeonhole her into a career that she not interested in. So at some point, the real estate company will hire somebody else to be the front person, but I'll still be involved and oversee everything. So let's see. Derek Ortiz says, "What finishes are you targeting?" We've looked at rum barrels. We've looked at cognac and Armagnac barrels. We've looked at Calvados barrels, and we haven't purchased any yet, but those are the ones that we have seriously considered. Let's see. I love seeing your Belfour Fighting Sioux bottle on the corner of your videos. Yeah, so Eddie Belfour, Hockey Hall of Famer, started his brand of whiskey, Belfour Spirits, with his son and daughter. They live here local, very close to me. I've been blessed to be able to meet the family. They are amazing. I am obsessed with Dane, and Lindsay's obsessed with Eddie. They're so kind to us every time we go out to an event. So I love their whiskey. A little bit different business model. We're non-distiller producers, so we buy whiskey that's been made by somebody else. The Belfour company, they have all of their whiskey contract distilled for their own use, which is kind of a catch-22 because it's very expensive, and it puts you under a pressure to release whiskey when it's young, maybe before it's reached its peak in aging. And that's been some of the complaints about Belfour, that it was a little bit expensive for its age. But given that I understand the economics behind whiskey, I completely understand why they've done everything that they've done with their pricing. They make a good product, and it's only going to get better from here. And they have some of the prettiest packaging in the industry. So I love those guys. Let's see. Just ordered the Pecanwood Belfour. Yes. If you haven't hit like yet, please do it. Yes, let's do that. It says, oh, there. Hold on. Let me see if I could see what that was. Do you need to avoid lender and whiskey enthusiast? I think what you're asking about is the negativity that's in the whiskey enthusiast community. Is it something that we worry about or that we need to avoid? Yes and no. I mean, we make a product that should appeal to the whiskey enthusiast. There have been whiskey enthusiasts who talk negatively about the product, but it's mostly because they don't like me or Christopher, right? To me, it's kind of comical if somebody tastes this whiskey and they go, "Oh, this whiskey's garbage. These guys are just pushing stuff. They think they're celebrities, whatever the negative thing is that they say." And then they go, do a single barrel of Rossville Union for their whiskey club, or they go buy a bottle of Sagamore or any other of the number of other brands that have the same liquid in it. And I'm like, do you hate the whiskey or do you hate us? I mean, like there is no solid argument to say that the whiskey's not good, right? And considering that we fight hard to find whiskey at a price that we can release it so that it is the best value of its kind. Our goal is to be at or below anyone else's price that's releasing a similar product, similar age, cash strength and non-chill filtered. And so, it's like, what is there to hate on? So yeah, I don't think that we avoid the whiskey enthusiasts at all. But, there are people out there that when they find out Fred Minnick rated it well or whatever, that they go, oh, this is all conspiracy and this is BS. And I think this and I think that. And that's fine. I mean, those people were never going to be converted anyway. So I don't spend any time worrying about those haters. Um, let's see. So Bobby Massey asked, do y'all age in Houston or another facility? So that's an interesting conversation. So all of the barrels, so the 15-year was tanked and shipped to us in shipping containers. So there was no aging happening. It was totally sealed. So all of the aging for this happened in Kentucky. The barrels for the rye have been shipped in Texas, and they have been aging here. And when you buy barrels, let's say you buy 500 barrels, you might have 150 of those barrels that turn the age that you want them to be, in this case, 6 years old, in 2 months. And you might have another 150 that are 3 months after that, and another 200 that are 6 months after that. But when you buy them, you typically take possession of all of them, and they're spending time in your aging facility. Houston is actually a relatively mild aging area, or at least the facilities that we have barrels in, compared to most other Texas areas. The humidity is super high, and so we don't have as much angel share loss as you would in other areas of the state. And our facilities are relatively well insulated, so we don't experience the extreme temperature swings that you have in like an ironclad building. And so, yeah, the rye has spent some time aging in Texas. The bourbon will come in barrels, and it might spend a little bit of time in Texas, but we're headed into the season where the barrels are relatively dormant. And I'm not sure that the amount of bourbon that we have, because we do have a limited amount of the bourbon, that's not going to be a permanent brand line extension unless we find some more. So when that comes out, I want you to go out and buy it, because it's not going to be around forever. And I don't know that it'll sell out fast enough that I don't know that we'll go through enough seasonal change for those barrels to actually, develop some character from Texas. But I would say for sure that the rye has changed because of the time that it's spent here. So let's see. There are always haters. Social media allows those people to hide behind their devices. That is so true. That's why we preach against troll culture in Bourbon Real Talk. How many people in the bourbon business engage or will be engaged in blending totes or barrels? How many people in your business engaged? That's actually a super interesting question. So there are companies that make a really big deal about their blending process, right? And they're like, the reason why you need to buy our releases is that they're blended to perfection. And I did a podcast piece on this because I felt like there was a little bit of marketing deception to that. If you buy however many barrels, there's not barrels that you taste and you're like, oh, dump these out, right? Everything gets put into a blend. And so the truth is that our blends are overseen by the head distiller, Julian at Gulf Coast. But as I mentioned, when we're blending 40 or so barrels together, it averages out a lot of the variance between barrels, and we end up with something that's pretty consistent. So there hasn't been a real big emphasis. The other thing is that our brand is targeted towards whiskey enthusiasts who don't really mind a little variance between batches. It kind of makes it exciting, and some people like this batch more than that batch. So there hasn't been a ton of emphasis put on blending to profile. But yeah, I think that there's a little bit too much emphasis put on blending by some of the brands out there because every barrel that they bought is going to get put in a blend. They're not dumping barrels. So let's see. So Jared Daniels asked, "What's my favorite shelf available hidden gem?" Well, shelf available. My favorite hidden gem is probably Benchmark Foolproof. And the reason why I like it is because I make it up to Indiana, Indiana often enough that I can buy it, right? Because it's available there, but it's not available everywhere, and it's super hard to find in Texas. But it's like a higher proof version of Buffalo Trace. Love the flavors. Price is right. It's like $22. So that's one that I love. In terms of like shelf available, hidden, I don't know that it's hidden, but Wild Turkey 101, I know a lot of people just, poo-poo it because it's everywhere and it's inexpensive and whatnot. But it's one of the highest quality, pours that you can get. It's around 8 years old. It's a good age statement for a bottle that's $22. Nowadays, you're looking at roughly $11 to $12 per year of age for bourbon. And Wild Turkey is one of the best values. So that's what I'd say. Let's see. I've seen online that the bourbon is still available in a couple states, California, Florida. Come the first of the month, I'll check and see if it's still available. Yeah. Unfortunately, there are some bottles that are out there, but they're priced a little higher than we anticipated. So bourbon goes through the 3-tier system before it makes it to retailer for you to buy it. And the producer has their margin that they mark everything up to make their profit. And then they sell it to a wholesaler. The wholesaler adds in what they call laid-in costs, which is any shipping cost, any state taxes that they pay, and they add that on top of their acquisition cost, and then they add in their margin, and then they sell it to the retailer, and then the retailer adds in their margin, and then you pay it. And so that is why anything that gets done at the beginning of the process at the producer level can have a big impact on the final bottle cost, and you have to take all that stuff into consideration. But yeah, so let's see. Oh, I was alluding. The prices have gotten kind of high for the 15-year in California and Florida, and the price should be a little above 140 in Florida because of the state taxes being added in and our shipping costs being a little bit higher. But it shouldn't be up around 200. I think somebody's making some extra margin on that based on the price that we sold it for. But, is it worth $200? If you think of a 15-year is worth $12 per year, it's close. It's not quite right. But, I've had friends of mine who bought extra that wanted to get rid of their 15-year. I've paid $250 for bottles. So, I think it's worth it, but it's your pocketbook. So you got to do what you think is best. Let's see. What's my favorite to make an old fashioned with? I don't drink a lot of old fashions, but when I make whiskey cocktails, it's usually a whiskey smash. And I almost always use Wild Turkey 101 for reasons already mentioned. Let's see. What do you do with your barrels when you dump them? That is a good question. I actually don't know. The distillery handles all of that. And I am assuming that they are repurposing them by selling them to somebody else because there's a whole market for used barrels. And the 15-year, we didn't get the barrels because, again, it came in shipping containers. But the rye barrels, we do have those. And I'm not exactly sure who they're selling those to, but they're definitely getting sold and moved out of the warehouse. So let's see what else we got. Let's see. What pours? Let's see. Pours that set off your bourbon journey, and do you have a sentimental pour? Yeah, actually, both are the same. It was Jack Daniel's Black Label. I don't want to argue with you all about whether or not it's bourbon because it is, but I know it's not labeled as bourbon. But yeah, so I used to collect wine, and wine is not super shareable. This was before Corvin, so you can take a sample out. When you open it, you kind of drink the whole thing. And when I discovered whiskey and how shareable it was because of its longevity in the bottle, actually before that, I went on a trip. I didn't drink till I was about 28. And I went on a trip with some friends of ours that drank. And I said, I want to have a drink everywhere we go. I want to see what I like. And everywhere I went, I would just think of a different like drink that I had heard in movies or television or whatever. I'm like, I'll have a scotch and soda, right? I didn't even know what scotch was, right? I'll have a whiskey and Coke. And they're all like, what kind? I'm like, I don't know, surprise me. And through that process, I ended up settling on Jack Daniel's. It was sweet, it mixed well, all that stuff. And I ended up kind of settling on that being my drinker. And, back then I didn't drink very much. I've drank more today than I drink in a whole 2 weeks back then. But I'd have one drink every few weeks. But I just had Jack Daniel's, and my brother, my deceased brother, who's committed suicide, if you watch the podcast, when he was in the military, he got off on leave to come home. And he said that he wanted to go out with me and he wanted to have some drinks. And we discovered we both liked Jack Daniel's. That was his drink of choice. And at the time, it was my drink of choice. And the movie Borat had just come out. And so I took a flask with us and we went to a local movie theater and we had a drink there. And then we went to the movies. I brought my flask in and I brazenly asked the girl behind the counter for a water cup that had ice in it with no water. Because we drank on the rocks back then. And we watched Borat and drank my flask. And I got more inebriated than I'd probably ever been in my life. And I probably had 3 drinks total. Like I didn't even drink that much, but I didn't drink that much back then. And so my brother decided to take me to Waffle House to get some food in my stomach before he dropped me off, because I'd never been out drinking with the boys and he didn't want my wife to be mad at him. So we went to Waffle House and I ordered my my hash brown smothered, covered, and chopped. The waitress told us that she had been run over by a truck right before a little person walked in with 2 full-size women, and he was a pimp. So it was a wild night. I was super thrown off by all the wildness that was happening. I told that story at my brother's funeral. Everyone died laughing. So it's one of my fondest memories, one of my favorite drinking memories. So Jack Daniel's is both my gateway whiskey and my sentimental pour. And I do have a bottle of Jack Daniel's that I pull out on occasion. It's this guy, very old. It was found in my grandfather's closet when he passed away. He wasn't a big drinker. But this is Jack Daniel's. You can see it is a 90 proof. So this is before they dropped the proof. And if you look on the bottom, it is from 1983. So this bottle is close to being as old as me. But it is the same age as my brother. So I drink it sometimes on the anniversary of his death. So anyways, let's see. Scattered, smothered, covered, and burn it. Everybody has their own Waffle House order style, but yeah. Let's see. Any other questions? We've been on for over an hour, so we should wrap it up. Any new products in the pop line for the Bourbon Real Talk store? Yes, we do have new products. We didn't advertise all the new products that we have we have the new cocktail kits that are up there. We have black t-shirts coming. So we just released the navy blue t-shirts. We're gonna release some black t-shirts that's been requested. The original gray t-shirts are still on sale, but we're running out of sizes. So if you want to get a t-shirt at a good price, you can go check those out. And I'm sure Lindsay's working on some other stuff. She's always working on something, but just trying to make sure that we don't run out of inventory is difficult, because when we order things overseas and then there's shipping delays, we've had product that's been caught in port by union strikes, and there's all kinds of stuff to try to deal with. And Lindsay's kind of the master of all that. But we do have black t-shirts coming real soon, and more cocktail kits coming soon. So, all right. Any other questions? It says, where would you source your barrels, specifically the rum barrels? That's why we haven't pulled the trigger, because you talk to these barrel brokers and they're like, yeah, we got rum barrels, and we're like, okay, well, where was the rum from? If it's Jamaica, we don't want it, right? And we have one source that is a mass-produced American rum. The cool thing about that is that the barrels are super fresh, and barrels sitting empty after they've been dumped before you refill them can add some flavors that are thrown off that wouldn't be very enjoyable. And so that's good, but it's not like, I'd rather it be, Belize or, Barbados or something like that. That's a more well-known region. And then our other source is a Bacardi rum source. So we're trying to weigh our options and see what we think is going to produce the best flavor. So yeah, that's where we're at on the sourcing barrels. And then if we go with cognac and Armagnac, there's a barrel broker that lives in the cognac Armagnac region that we've been in contact with, and he is the world's foremost expert on that, and has worked on every cognac, Armagnac, Calvados, and Orange Carousel project that you've probably ever heard of. And so he's a super cool guy. Really just loves the idea of finished whiskeys. He's passionate about it. So we may do some of that stuff with him as well. So let's see. Thanks for the pour background. What watch is that? It looks cool. This is an original grain watch. It's made out of whiskey barrels. So if you go to Original Grain, I think it's originalgrain.com. They make barrels out of whiskey staves, and Lindsay bought me one of those. So anyways, well, I think that's all I have for you guys tonight. I kept you on for way too long, but I'm so grateful that you all got on. If you are interested in buying some of this whiskey, I am going to post the link for the retail locations that have the product. And I'm also going to post the link to purchase it on bourbonoutfitter.com. I thank everybody for tuning in. I pray that you liked it enough to go out and buy a bottle, because if you do, I will be able to justify doing this more often. So as always, if you woke up this morning and you're unsure whether or not anyone loved you, just know that I love you. And I'll see you next time on Bourbon Real Talk.